Well, the US political power couple, the Obamas, will make their pitch for Kamala Harris during the Democratic National Convention's second night. The former US president is still a North Star in the party. Illinois' lieutenant governor has told the press, and his voice will be integral to rallying Democrats, independents, and moderate Republicans behind Kamala Harris. In fact, the former First Lady Michelle Obama's speech, meanwhile, will give the crowd a glimpse of the party's fantasy candidate many believe. It remains to be seen if she will repeat her now famous convention speech approach of taking the high road when talking about Donald Trump. We actually spoke to Ranjiv Puri, who is at the DNC. Listen in to what he told NDTV.
There are two questions I want to ask you. One is about the caucuses, the specific messaging for each of the caucuses. And second, of course, is the state that you're representing, which itself is a swing state. What do you think could work in the Democrats' favor?
So Michigan is trending blue. I think there's a lot of excitement with Vice President Harris now being the presumptive nominee to be carrying us forward to November. We are starting to see that coalition from 2008 getting excited again. Volunteers are asking to door knock and make phone calls and talk to their friends. Things are very exciting in Michigan. If we talk about polling, the same polling that showed a very close race, or maybe even Trump leading a month ago, now has switched kind of in full form, has Kamala Harris rising above in the polling. We are very excited with the work that's happening in Michigan and the infrastructure that's been built in Michigan to make sure that our voters are coming out. I'm obviously biased, but I think Michigan is probably the most important state in the country this election. There's 15 electoral votes. There's hardly any path to winning the presidency without winning Michigan this year.
Right. And as far as your task is also cut out, talk to us about what would you and, of course, the Democrats in some of these swing states be really focused on in terms of messaging?
Well, like I said, it's really about what can you do for me, right? As you mentioned earlier, and a lot of voters want to know how their
but inflation is an issue that Donald Trump's campaign talks about many times. They've picked on inflation specifically. How will the Kamala campaign or Harris campaign respond to that?
So they just put out the campaign just put out a plan to tackle economic issues. The first is kind of going after artificial price gouging that's happening. We are seeing businesses inflate prices just to increase their profits. Now we have a plan to tackle that very directly. And so the key here is to obviously bring down inflation while continuing to invest in our communities to make sure that everyone here can reach their potential. As was mentioned in President Biden's speech last year, America is the greatest country in the world, and people want to live and move here to work for that American dream, for that social mobility. And so it's restoring the ability for people to reach their potential in this great country.
We also have a live update from Voice of America's Kane at the moment. He joins us live from Chicago. Thanks so much, Kane, for joining us on the World 24/7. Take our viewers through how Obama's DNC speech is likely to inject some hope into Kamala Harris's campaign.
Well, it actually comes on the 20th anniversary of President Barack Obama, then candidate Barack Obama's ascendancy onto the national political stage. 20 years ago, in 2004, Barack Obama was a state senator here in Illinois. He was running for a U.S. Senate seat in Illinois, and he gave a speech at the Democratic National Convention that year that was an energetic speech that wound up becoming a defining moment in his career. It is the thing that launched him onto the national stage. It gave him prominence, and it actually gave him the springboard by which he could seek the presidency. So Barack Obama, as he comes here to Chicago tonight, he is going to speak about that 20th anniversary, that moment 20 years ago, and the bridge from him to Kamala Harris here in Chicago in 2024. So for the Democrats and the delegates that have gathered here at the United Center, you can see it behind me, they're here to listen to what some people have referred to as the rock stars, the current rock stars of the Democratic Party. Not just Barack Obama, but Barack Obama himself makes jokes that his wife, former First Lady Michelle Obama, sells out auditoriums better than him and sells more books than him. She will speak before President Obama does tonight, and there's a lot of people here eager to hear what she has to say.
But many argue that Obama is actually in a position to do for Kamala Harris what former President Bill Clinton did for him at the 2012 Democratic Convention, which was to essentially lay out the rationale for a second Obama term and explain Obama's economic program to voters who were skeptical of the pace of recovery after the recession we saw that in 2008, 2009. Is this considered a sort of turning point tonight?
Well, you know, inflation has been very high here in the United States for a while. It is definitely the economic policy of the Biden administration, in which Vice President Kamala Harris has been a part of. And so it is a moment for Barack Obama to perhaps help Kamala Harris differentiate how she will create her own administration's policies that will combat some of these things that are concerning voters. But it's also a moment really to create party unity. You know, there are still factions of the Democratic Party that are concerned about the war in Gaza and other issues. And so this is the moment perhaps for Barack Obama not to really talk about his past, not for him to sort of dwell on what happened during his administration. This is a moment for Barack Obama to sort of be the standard bearer of unity in the Democratic Party. And that's the message that perhaps he's going to deliver tonight to these delegates here in Chicago.
Kane, you just briefly touched upon Gaza. We're also hearing that thousands of people have actually converged in Chicago to voice their concerns about Biden administration's stance on the Israel-Gaza war. But have the protests been smaller than expected so far?
The size of the protests wasn't necessarily determined before this event happened here. There were thousands of people that protested yesterday. The protests here, they're still continuing today, but there doesn't seem to be as many people. And, you know, the motions on the floor. You know, the interesting thing about tonight, it really was the focus or the showcase of the Democratic Party. And tonight was the roll call vote. And so there were a lot of delegates, a lot of people here that came to the United Center to you know, participate in the roll call. We heard a lot about the protests yesterday. We've heard less about it today. But, you know, there's still 2 more days left of this convention here in Chicago.
Right. Also, just a little over 4 weeks ago, Republicans were confidently eyeing victory in this upcoming election. Is it fairly safe to say that now it's Democrats' turn to take an early victory lap, or too early?
So this is the convention for Democrats. And typically, as it was for the Republicans in Milwaukee, this is a moment in which they're able to be in prime time on television here in the United States. They're able to reach voters. They're able to send their message out. And so there's always a bump in polling. There's always a sort of momentum that each party carries when they leave these conventions and head back on the campaign trail. So not only has the Democratic Party benefited from there being a change in the top of the ticket, as Joe Biden has agreed to step down and Kamala Harris is now the nominee, that momentum that she had coming into this could be buffered by even more momentum heading out of this week of this convention as she heads out onto the campaign trail. Something to keep in mind here, too. We're less than 80 days away from Election Day, November 5th here in the United States. But the interesting part about this is that early ballots and mail-in ballots, they actually begin in September, in the middle of September, in some of the states here in the United States. So the momentum that this ticket carries out of this convention could translate into votes in just as little as 3 weeks from now, as people start to cast ballots. And so it shouldn't really be understated, the sort of polling numbers that you'll see in the coming days after this convention. And if they show an increasing margin between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, that could be good news for the Democrats in November.
Right, Kane, as we wrap, I just want to ask, is it all that rosy for Kamala Harris? Because an ABC Washington Post survey actually published on the eve of the convention put Trump 9 points ahead of Kamala Harris when asked who they trust more to handle the economy and inflation. But you're on the ground. What are you picking up on?
Yes, the economy right now is definitely a primary issue for voters that are independent or voters that, you know, each of these parties need to turn out. People are having kitchen table issues here in the United States in which they're concerned about the price of groceries. They're concerned about the cost of gasoline. Petroleum, they're concerned about all of these costs that they need to pay for to live day to day. And so that is going to be a challenge for Kamala Harris to address because she will be carrying on the Biden administration. And so these are things that will have to be addressed on the campaign trail, at least to satisfy those voters whom each of these parties is going to need to turn out to vote for them when they do actually cast those ballots. Because Republicans, they're going to vote for Donald Trump. Democrats, they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. Who each of these candidates needs to reach is the independent voter or the non-aligned voters in this country that haven't necessarily chosen their candidate yet. Those are the people that these candidates are trying to sell their message to.